Hold a microphone and flip and read a script at the same time. It's a pleasure to be here at the Move Over AIPAC conference. And like Steve, I'd like to thank Medea and Ray for inviting us, and especially all of you for coming out to hear us speak. I have great respect for what you are doing to try to change U.S. Middle East policy, and I wish you all the best of luck in your endeavor. As Steve indicated, I'm going to speak about the lobby's influence on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Specifically, I'm going to argue that the lobby, working hand in hand with Israel, makes it virtually impossible for the United States to push forward a two-state solution, which is not only in the best interest of the United States, but is in the best interest of Israel and the Palestinians as well. In fact, I believe we've now reached the point where, regrettably, the two-state solution is a fantasy. The West Bank and Gaza, which would have been the home of a Palestinian state, are now being incorporated into a greater Israel, which will be an apartheid state bearing marked resemblance to white-ruled South Africa. I believe that this outcome will prove disastrous for Israel over the long term and will also do serious damage to American foreign policy for years to come. Let me explain how I reached these conclusions by starting with some big picture points. The Middle East is the most important region of the world for the United States today. And within that region, Israel is the most important country for Washington. As Steve noted, we have a special relationship with Israel that has no parallel in recorded history. Furthermore, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is the issue that we care the most about in our dealings with the Jewish state. Regarding that issue, it's important to recognize that every president since 1967 has opposed settlement building in the West Bank and Gaza, which are commonly called the occupied territories, as almost all of you know. Yet no president has been able to put serious pressure on Israel to stop building settlements, much less dismantle any of them. Perhaps the best evidence of America's impotence is what happened in the 1990s during the Oslo peace process. Between 1993 and 2000, Israel confiscated 40,000 acres of Palestinian land, constructed 250 miles of bypass and connector roads, doubled the number of settlers, and built 30 new settlements. President Clinton did hardly anything to halt this expansion. Indeed, the United States continued to give Israel billions of dollars in foreign aid each year and to protect it at every turn on the diplomatic front. Since the start of the Oslo peace process in 1993, the United States has not simply been opposed to settlement building, it has also been deeply committed to pushing forward a two-state solution as the best way to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. President Obama is certainly dedicated to those two goals. This leads to the obvious question: why are American leaders so committed to stopping settlement building and achieving a two-state solution? There is both a strategic and a moral rationale behind our policy. Israel's brutal treatment of the Palestinians, which we support by giving Israel money and diplomatic protection at every turn, is, not surprisingly, one of the main causes of our terrorism problem. Israel's backers maintain that U.S. support for Israel had nothing to do with 9/11, but that claim is simply not true. Consider the motivations of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who the 9/11 Commission describes as the principal architect of the attacks. According to the Commission, KSM's animus toward the United States stemmed not from his experiences there as a student, but rather from his violent disagreement with U.S. foreign policy favoring Israel. Numerous independent accounts have also documented that Osama bin Laden was deeply concerned about the Palestinians' dire situation since he was a young man. And the 9/11 Commission reports that he wanted the attackers to strike Congress because he saw it as the most important source of support for Israel in the United States. The Commission also tells us that bin Laden twice wanted to move up the date of the attacks because of events involving Israel, even though doing so would have increased the risk of failure. Former President Bill Clinton has recently speculated that the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict provides the impetus for about half of our terrorism problem. President Obama, Vice President Biden, and General Petraeus, as Steve made clear, have all made comments that Israel's colonization of the occupied territories is doing serious damage to America's interests in the Middle East and surrounding areas. And earlier this year, President Obama's former national security advisor, General James Jones, told an audience in Israel that I am of the belief that had God appeared in front of President Obama in 2009 and said if he could do one thing on the face of the planet, and one thing only, to make the world a better place and give people more hope and opportunity for the future, I would venture that it would have something to do with finding the two-state solution to the Middle East. In short, there is no hope of ending our terrorism problem and improving America's standing in the Middle East if the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not resolved. But that will only happen if there is a two-state solution. It certainly will not happen if Israel turns itself into an apartheid state and the special relationship remains in place. There's also a powerful moral rationale behind the two-state solution. What the Zionists and then the Israelis have done to the Palestinian people since November 29, 1947, when the UN put forth its plan to partition mandatory Palestine, is one of the great crimes of modern history. They ethnically cleansed about 700,000 Palestinians in 1948, and then cleansed roughly another 200,000 Palestinians when they captured the West Bank in 1967. Israel has not only refused to allow the Palestinians to have a viable state of their own, but prominent Zionists like David Ben-Gurion, Golda Meir, and Chaim Weizmann have gone so far as to argue that there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. Palestinians who live inside Israel today are treated like second-class citizens, while those in the West Bank and Gaza effectively live in an apartheid state. It's worth noting that a number of South Africans who have visited the occupied territories have said that the Palestinians live in worse conditions than blacks did in white-ruled South Africa. And let us not forget that the Goldstone report concluded that Israel committed war crimes and possible crimes against humanity during Operation Cast Lead. The bottom line is that it is imperative for both strategic and moral reasons for the United States to push forward a two-state solution. President Obama, of course, fully understands this logic, which is why, after taking office in 2009, he and his principal foreign policy advisors began demanding that Israel stop all settlement building in the occupied territories, to include East Jerusalem, so that serious negotiations with the Palestinians could begin. In response, Prime Minister Netanyahu made it clear that Israel intended to continue building settlements, and that he and almost everyone in his ruling coalition opposed a two-state solution. Netanyahu, of course, won this fight. The Israeli Prime Minister not only refused to stop building the 2,500 housing units that were under construction in the West Bank, but just to make it clear to Obama who was the boss, in late June 2009, he authorized the building of 300 new homes in the West Bank. Netanyahu refused to even countenance any limits on settlement building in East Jerusalem, which is supposed to be the capital of a future Palestinian state. By the end of September 2009, Obama publicly conceded that Netanyahu had beaten him in their fight over the settlements. The president falsely denied that freezing settlement construction had ever been a precondition for resuming the peace process, and instead he meekly asked Israel to please exercise restraint while it continued colonizing the West Bank. Fully aware of his triumph, Netanyahu said on September 23rd, and again this is 2009, "I am pleased that President Obama has accepted my approach that there should be no preconditions." The Obama administration engaged in a second round of fighting over the settlements in the spring of 2010, after the Netanyahu government embarrassed Vice President Biden during his visit to Israel by announcing plans to build 1,600 housing units in East Jerusalem. Netanyahu rejected Obama's request to stop building settlements in East Jerusalem. "As far as we are concerned," he said on March 21st, "building in Jerusalem is like building in Tel Aviv. Our policy on Jerusalem is like the policy in the past 42 years." One day later, at the 2010 AIPAC conference, he said, "The Jewish people were building Jerusalem 3,000 years ago, and the Jewish people are building Jerusalem today. Jerusalem is not a settlement, it's our capital." Netanyahu won that fight too. He was invited to the White House in early July 2010, where President Obama embraced him and papered over their differences about settlement building in East Jerusalem.